achieved.
Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and I sit before you a disappointed individual, disappointed man, if you will, because I had originally intended, I had the camera set up, and I was going to roll through an actual behind-the-camera breakdown of the event. Talk about it. It's something I haven't done in a while. I really wanted to do it. Unfortunately, when I put everything together with the graphics and everything else I had intended to use, the audio and the video wouldn't sync up in the rendering, and it looked terrible, so I had to eventually give up on it. You'll hear the audio in the next two sections, but I had to redo the introduction, obviously. Now, in this post-fight podcast, I will be breaking down not one but two events. I'll be talking about both UFC Fight Night 114, which just transpired in Mexico City. I went 9-2 overall. I had a fantastic night. I did very well. The bet packs produced some of the biggest winnings of the year. We're talking over 200 units won by the big risk, big reward bet pack. 75 units won by the big bankroll bet pack. Again, depending on your betting style, you choose which bundle you want to go with and see how it turns out. Obviously, both sides coming out winners there. I picked Sergio Pettis in the main event. I lost the Reyna Marcos split decision, which was very difficult. But overall, very strong night. But we are then going to transition back in time to UFC 214, which took place on July 29th. I didn't do very well that night as far as my predictions were concerned. It was a great night. It was a night I'll never forget, that's for sure. But I went 5-8 overall. Not and that included winning the final three fights tonight, all picking favorites in the last three title fights. So the record was probably worse than it actually should have been. Or sorry, better than it should have been. Not impressed with it at all. But still, John Jones finishing Daniel Cormier in the main event, which is something I predicted. Very gracious in the main event post-fight after being handed the title. I was very impressed with that. Unfortunately, Daniel Cormier had to go through, just that suffering a defeat, the anguish that he dealt with. But, it is what it is. It's very unfortunate, but there's winners and there's losers, and that's just the way sports are. Any competition has to have a winner and has to have a loser. Well, in most scenarios, I'm sure you're looking. There could be a tie. Of course there could be, but not in. You don't have that in this particular fight. So there's that. So we'll talk about that. Those two events shortly. I also wanted to give you a quick update on my jiu-jitsu, my pursuit of jiu-jitsu. A friend of mine has been doing it for a couple of years. She's a blue belt. Very impressive. Just some of her accomplishments and her competitions, and just overall just a superstar as far as I'm concerned. I want to get involved. It's something I definitely have my eye set on. I might have to put that on the back burner momentarily or temporarily while I get a few things straightened out, but I certainly intend to eventually get out there, whether it be for one session or something I make a go of and get involved on a more regular basis. It's something I'm thinking about, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's interesting. She just sent me a video actually of her rolling, and I promised her I wouldn't critique it, and I'm going to keep that promise. But I was very impressed with what I saw, and it's very cool. So, on that note, let's get to the breakdown of UFC Fight Night 114 from Mexico City. All right, so as promised, we're going to break down UFC Fight Night 114 first. And, of course, that was the Mexico event featuring Sergio Pettis and Brandon Moreno going head-to-head in the main event. We'll get to that momentarily. I went 9-2 on the card. That included picking Sergio Pettis as an underdog on the road to pick up a victory. My other two losses, a contestable split decision with Randa Marcos and, of course, Alan Jouban getting knocked out. I know there were a lot of favorites. There were only two. Well, I guess there were three underdogs that came through, two of which I picked. But it was a pretty good overall way to end, I guess, the summer of 2017 as far as predicting MMA fights goes. It was pretty solid, 9-2. My bet packs were fantastic. The big bankroll bundle that you get in the bet pack, if you're one of these guys with a lot of money and you want to bet big on just a couple of fights, I put down 29 units combined and returned 75.6 units. That's pretty solid. I know I'm not a traditional bettor the way a lot of people do things, but still that turned out fairly well. But the big risk, big reward bundle, that's where we kicked some ass. 27 units bet entirely, 211 units returned. And that was awesome. That included, now look at this home run I hit in my wildcard section. Of course, I'll have it posted below so you can scroll down, you can see this. In my wildcard section, I had Alan Jouban, Nico Price under 1.5 rounds at a plus 157. I had Herrera and Rinaldi under 2.5 rounds at plus 105, and I nailed Dustin Ortiz to win inside the distance at plus 540. Did I expect him to knock Sandoval out that quickly? No, I thought he might be able to take him out in rounds 2 or 3 by simply wearing him out with grappling and strikes, and eventually Sandoval would just give out. But heck, I'll take what we can get. We had some solid picks that night, and again, I'm not going to go through all of them. You can roll down the page and you can check it out for yourself. Now let's look at the card. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get to see the actual couple opening fights of the card until they were reshown. But Jordan Rinaldi taking out Alvaro Herrera with a Von Flue choke, that was damn impressive for Rinaldi. I had Rinaldi winning it again. I kind of thought he'd wear him down with takedowns, but ultimately he got him quickly with that Von Flue choke. You don't see that too often in MMA. I think it was the third time in the history of the UFC that's actually been landed. So fairly impressive. Up next, Joseph Morales versus Roberto Sanchez. This is one of those fights. It was kind of a toss-up. 2 debuting guys, very similar backgrounds. I went with Morales, who was a slight underdog, simply because of his background. Fighting with a team alpha male, I thought he'd be a little bit more prepared, and again, he picks up a rear naked choke in a fairly entertaining but relatively short fight. 2-0, good start. Jose Quinones, or Alberto Quinones, taking on Diego Rivas. I had Quinones to win that fight. I thought he might stop him. Ultimately, he picks up a decision. Again, takedowns were a crucial role, and his striking activity. I was very impressed with Quinones. Both guys have been away for a while, so it's kind of one of those crapshoots where you don't know exactly what you're going to get when these two guys hit the cage. I was impressed with both men, and I was happy with my prediction. So that's 3 in the bag right there, 3-0. Fight number 4 in the night, Hani Yahya against Henry Burre Briones. Now, I had Yahya. I picked him by submission. Yahya tends to be a bit of a decision machine where he just takes guys down, tends to get the first 2 rounds in the bag, gasses hard, hangs on and survives round 3, hopes they don't score at 10-8. I had him by submission. I actually encourage you guys to bet him by submission, and he locked up that Kimura in impressive fashion and just took out Briones, and maybe he recognized there had to be some urgency here because with the altitude situation, he wanted to get that fight done as quickly as possible. So good win for Yahya. That's 4-0. Fight number 5, the one I just talked about with Dustin Ortiz starching Hector Sandoval in 15 seconds. Again, is that the quickest fight in flyweight history? It might be in UFC flyweight history. I think it might be the quickest stoppage. Again, I felt Ortiz was going to use his ground game. He was going to score takedowns. Sandoval put up a fight early on, but as he tried to muscle things, and Ortiz just kept flowing with takedowns and transitions. We'd see Sandoval fade. The altitude would play a role. Ortiz would stop him. Very similar to what he did against Willie Gates. Not the case. Dustin Ortiz got that shit done very quickly. 15 seconds. Very impressive. Knocks him out. 5-0. Whew, that's a pretty darn good start. We go to 6-0. Again, this is a fight. The outcome, not as I expected, but Jack Hermanson over Brad Scott. I had Hermanson winning by decision. We all know about this fight in the card, that final prelim fight, and how I feel it can play out with a fight going the distance. They try to keep people tuned in. And, Bradley Scott's a tough guy to finish, and Hermanson did exactly that. He took it to him in a hurry, showing that new wrinkle, that wrestling game, similar to what we saw against Alex Nicholson. Takedowns, get to a dominant position, and land strikes so the ref has to pull you off. So again, another impressive victory, and I'm 6-0 to start the card. I cannot complain how things got going. Now we move to the main card. And I picked Alejandro Perez to beat Andre Sudenkamp. I had it by decision. I wasn't 100% fan of the decision, even though it worked out in my favor, and I fist pumped and all that shit you do. You celebrate when your fighter comes through in a very close fight. Perez, he tends to be a bit of a slow starter. He did it against Morales as well, where he is very fortunate to walk away with a draw in that matchup. I felt he lost it well in advance of that point being taken away. But here again, he's slow starter. Sudenkamp slowed down a little bit. Butchering that again. Sukamthaw, whatever the hell his name is. Slowed down a little bit. Perez got a little bit more aggressive, and again, maybe fighting at home, probably fighting at home helped him. Had that fight taking place somewhere else, maybe Perez does not get the victory. But either way, hey, I'm 7-0 after that fight. Our next fight, middleweight bout, and this is a tough one because I like Rashad Evans. I want to see him do well at middleweight. I want to see him make one more run, but he's probably past at this point. And I'm shocked we haven't heard a retirement announcement at this point. I took Sam Alvey to win. I can't remember if I said by knockout or by decision. He won by split decision. It was a very close fight. Evans has traditionally struggled with southpaws. When he fought Little Nog, he looked like hot garbage warmed over. When he fought Daniel Kelly, he struggled with Daniel Kelly, even though he should have been the faster, more experienced, just better all-around striker. Kelly just kept plugging away, and that's what Alvey did here. Evans just didn't pull the trigger. He showed glimpses of what he's capable of with his speed, but he just didn't pull the trigger. His wrestling was very ineffective, and he didn't have a backup plan. It seemed like he was so insistent on taking him down that once he couldn't get him down, his only plan was to continue to drive, continue to push, try and take him down, and it wasn't working out. And I thought Alvey did an excellent job of punishing him, landing those knees, clinching up, landing knees to, pulling his head down, driving knees home. Alvey didn't overwhelm him with strikes, but he did more, and that's what it came down to. So at that point, I'm 8-0 and looking very good. Now, I'll tell you the next matchup, because I was running short on time, because I just was, I didn't actually predict the next fight. It was a hell of a vicious knockout. Humberto Bandene, I can't even say it, taking out Martin Bravo by knee. It was kind of a kick, knee, whatever you want to call it. Impressive. Martin Bravo was heavily favored fighter. I think he was the most favored fighter on the card. Thank God I didn't pick that fight, because I probably would have picked Bravo and just moved on. So either way, I passed on that one, which I very, very rarely do. But I did. So whatever, it worked out. I'm still 8-0. I'm still undefeated. Here's my first loss of the night. And it was a tough one. Nico Price knocking out Alan Jouban. I talked about how Alan Jouban has had issues. He's been hurt in multiple fights. He's been knocked out now 3 times for his career, twice in the UFC, with Albert Tumenov getting him before that. And it kind of pisses me off a little bit, because when you go back to Alan Jouban versus Platinum Mike Perry, I picked Perry in that matchup because I looked at the two and I said, here's a younger guy in Perry with a better chin and knockout power. Jouban has knockout power, but he's older and his chin is questionable. And I said, I think Perry eventually clips him, eventually knocks him out. I looked at Nico Price and I went, didn't look so hot one fight prior. It was on short notice. But I felt, Jouban could be the more technical fighter, the slightly longer fighter, have a little bit of success with just a long, maybe not longer in reach, but just hit him at distance where Price could not, and would avoid the early rush, and instead he got himself knocked out. That was tough to swallow, because that really damaged a number of parlays and investments I had going into that section. Jouban was a tough defeat. Good for Nico Price. Absolutely good guy. Seems like he's a good. I like him as a fighter. I look forward to seeing what he does going forward. But yeah, it's a heartbreaker nonetheless. Co-main event. Catch weight, because Alexa Grasso missed weight, 119 pounds. I had Randa Marcos. And I had Marcos. I felt Grasso is hesitant and struggles when the threat of the takedown exists. I picked Felice Herrig to upset her last time, and I was correct. I felt Marcos looked very good. Grasso probably got the better, that won the first round with better strikes overall. But Marcos got in there in the second round, made it a gritty fight, got that fight to the ground, mounted her a couple of times, looked very strong on the mat like she did against Carlos Esparza at times, where basically it was like, yeah, you can take me down, but then I'm going to have my way with you. I'm going to get to a better position, and we're going to make this work in my favor. And that was something that Marcos did very well in round 2. Round 3, obviously she was tired. Her cardio is a bit of a question mark. Not terrible, but certainly it's one of those things in round 3 that, it's not a go-to. It's not one of her strengths. And fighting at altitude certainly didn't help her. And round 3, I thought it was back and forth. I maybe thought Marcos was ahead. She had a nice takedown. Grasso was landing some good strikes as well. And I think the turning point came, I think it was about a minute and a half, about 90 seconds left in the fight. We saw Marcos kind of shoot in, get a hold of Grasso's body, and Alexa jumped up and threatened with a guillotine. And I look at that and I say, I don't think that was the type of guillotine that's actually tight and is actually going to be an issue if Marcos goes to the mat with her. But hey, we've seen stuff happen, like a fight at UFC 214, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I think that was the turning point. Had Marcos slammed her to the mat, probably wound up in top position, rode out the rest of the fight in top position, she probably wins the fight. Instead, she disengaged, backed off, they went back to striking, and Grasso got the better of the striking, and she won the fight as a result. Marcos is challenging it. I don't blame her. Nothing ever comes of that shit, though, so it's kind of a waste of time. Hopefully it doesn't cost her anything. But either way, disappointing. So there's my 2 losses for the night. A knockout and a split decision. 2 fights I really liked, but still. Main event time, I had Sergio Pettis. I had the underdog, the road dog, if you will, fighting in Mexico against a heavily favored, not heavily favored, but still favored, and certainly crowd favorite in Brandon Moreno. Good fight, and this fight actually played out like kind of like I expected. I thought Pettis might finish him, but what I saw is that Brandon Moreno is going to go for it early. He's going to score some takedowns. He's going to threaten Pettis, and as the fight goes on, Moreno's style is not conditioned to fight 5 rounds effectively. With the altitude again playing a role, he's going to slow down. He's going to get a little bit wild. His takedowns will become more predictable, more defendable, and Pettis is going to back him off. And Pettis is just so smooth with his striking. His combination striking is so strong. He's varied with his kicking techniques. Everything just looks very good with what Sergio throws, and Moreno really had no answer for it. He didn't get in there. He needed to get in there and mix it up and make it an ugly fight. But he just couldn't find a way to get in, or didn't have the energy to get in. Either way, I was very impressed with Pettis. Is he ready for a title shot yet? No. Do I want to see him thrown in there with a guy like Joseph Benavidez? Not really. I think Pettis needs one more win over who I think Henry Cejudo might be an interesting fight to see play out. I'd like to see a 5-rounder. make it a main event again. I'd watch that. People might not tune in for that because everybody shits all over the flyweights, but I kind of like that fight. And I think it'd be a good test to see where Pettis is at and then go for the shot at the title. I'm not protecting him from Benavidez. I guess I am a little bit. But we need new challengers, and Pettis is certainly one of them. Brandon Moreno, I think he was a product of circumstance. He's still a young, talented fighter. But you look, the Dustin Ortiz fight, he was losing until he knocked him out. And then dropped him and submitted him, the Lewis Smoka victory was kind of a product of the fact that Smoka is I call him a suicide grappler. He'll give up position routinely to eventually outsmart you and get the better position. Moreno didn't bite and submitted him. And, Ryan Benoit, no slouch, but he's not a top 15 guy, and he took Moreno to a split decision in a very contestable, very close fight. So, Moreno, not his fight. He'll rebound. He'll come back stronger than ever. He's a good young fighter, and I look forward to seeing him compete again. But, yeah, as far as Demetrius Johnson's concerned, I guess while we're touching upon that, Kayuchi Horiguchi is a guy that he's not longer in the UFC, which I was incredibly disappointed when they let him go. I felt he was making such strides that one or two more wins, and they could easily have paired him back up with Johnson. Look, here's the guy that's going to challenge him. Here's a guy with big power in his hands, lightning fast, improving wrestling. He will again be a challenge to DJ. But again, I keep saying again, you go back to when John Dodson fought DJ, and the rematch he was not nearly as competitive as the first fight. So again, Johnson is such a smart fighter that he's able to take his opponent's performance, break it down, figure out how to overcome him, and then does it with relative ease. So I don't know, going forward, I want to see who they pair him up against. Sergio Pettis is on the radar, but he's not quite there yet. So again, 9-2, very strong card overall with the bet packs and predictions, and just a generally entertaining matchup, lots of finishes. Very much enjoyed that. So that's enough about that. Let's get to UFC 114 and talk about how shitty I did, but at the same time, how much fun the card was. All right, so now let's move on to UFC 214, which actually took place before the Mexico card, and I did very poorly. Did not do well at all on that card. It was very upsetting to watch. I finished 5-8 overall, and the only reason I finished 5-8 is because I ran the table in the 3 title fights. I won the last 3 fights of the night, and it took a horrid record. Took a horrible record and turned it into a really bad record. There was no saving it. But let's run down that. The bet packs were atrocious. I can't even. I was so disgusted with my performance. I didn't even really look at them. I'll take a peek, and maybe I won something, but it was a negative night overall, and that was very unfortunate. It was a good night, I guess, in the end, if you know what I'm talking about. But the fights were good. Everything else was good that happened that night. But yeah, let's look at my performance so far. So we're going to kick things off. Drew Dober, it actually started pretty well. Drew Dober showed he's got some knockout power. I think it's the second knockout in the UFC, which was, it was a solid stoppage. He KO'd Josh Berkman, who, again, Josh Berkman, he's a fighter's fighter. He likes to fight. He has had no success since leaving the World Series of Fighting to come to the UFC for his second stint. He's been knocked out twice. That durability that he was known for certainly just not there anymore. And he had contemplated retirement after his last performance. I'm assuming he will just walk away at this point in time, but you never know. The flyweight bout, Jared Brooks versus Eric Shelton, split decision to Jared Brooks. I had Eric Shelton both in the fight, and the vast majority of the media, myself as well, when I'm scoring the fight, I had it 29-28 for Shelton. It was a split decision. I wasn't shocked it was a split, but I felt Shelton did enough. He had that knockdown. He defended some takedowns. He seemed to be the more active striker at times. I didn't, and it's just one of those fights. It was very frustrating because it was a very close fight, and when you're on the wrong end of close fights, that's difficult. And obviously at the time I didn't know that the night was going to be such shit the rest of the way. But 1-1 at that point. Up next, Alexander Albu against Kylan Curran. I had Curran to win the fight. I didn't get to see the last little bit of the matchup. I had to take off before it finished. It kind of looked to me like Albu was slowing down a little bit, and what I was hoping to see, Curran eventually take that fight over as the more active fighter with a lot more experience, both in the UFC and in general. Albu just kind of gritted it out. I have to go back and watch before I make a proper commentary on it. Obviously, when I look towards Albu's next matchup, because I'm assuming Curran will get cut, that's another loss for her in the UFC. And is she 4-6 or 4-5? No, it's not good. So, I'll go back and review Albu's performance and see what I think, but it is what it is. Featherweight bout, Andre Fili. Wow. So I'm 1-2 at this point. Andre Fili comes in, heavy favorite against a short notice Calvin Kattar. I believe that's how they pronounce his name. And Fili just shits the bed. 30-27s across the board, gets rocked, gets lit up on the feet. He's coming off the biggest win of his career, an upset I predicted where he took out Hawker Diaz. I was kind of disappointed with Fili's performance here. Not kind of, I really was disappointed with Fili's performance. And yeah, it was just one of those fights where he doesn't get out of the starting gate. He just does not get things going, and it's a loss. It's a big loss. It's definitely a career-damaging loss, I think, for Fili against a guy who is a relative unknown coming into this. Up next, featherweight, but wow, what a good fight. Brian Ortega versus Renato Moicano. I had Moicano in that fight, and I felt he was winning, and it's one of those, Ortega now 4 consecutive bouts has snatched victory from defeat with third round stoppages. And he submits a BJJ black belt who had never lost before, let alone been finished. That's very impressive. Now, one of the things I saw in this fight, and I actually commented on it with the people I was watching with, I said, it just bothers me when fighters have long hair. I know guys like to have long hair. Women will have female fighters will have long hair as well. But to me, it appears to make the impact of the strikes look more significant. And I go back to, I believe it was Michael Johnson against Jonathan Brookins way back in the Ultimate Fighter finale, the one George St. Pierre coached against Josh Koscheck. And every time Johnson hit Brookins early on, Brookins had his braided man bun thing, and his head looked like it was snapping back, and it just looks like the impact of the punches is far more significant than it is. And again, I was looking with Ortega, he was eating punches, but he was getting hit, and it looked like he was getting tagged every time he got hit. Ultimately, it worked out for him. You can't knock that. You can't say, oh, his performance, it was great. His striking looked better. His grappling was fantastic. His body work was really a point of emphasis here that I really thought was impressive. And again, I said to the people I was sitting with, the person I was sitting with watching the event, I said, you can see my guy's up, Moicano's up, but his body language is bothering me, and it looks like he's starting to slow down. It looks like his arms are dropping a little bit because he's getting tagged to the body. His nose is busted up. He is breaking as a fighter, and ultimately what's that lead to? A sloppy shot driving directly into a guillotine. Tap, tap, tap. It's all over. Up next, Aljamain Sterling against Renan Barão. So at that point, I am a fantastic 1-4, and I'm now at a swing fight where it's like either my night is hot shit and it's over with this next matchup, or Renan Barão pulls it out like he's expected to, and he didn't. And he won the first round very, very well. I was surprised, a 30-26. Sterling was dominant. Maybe they gave him 2 dominant rounds. I don't know, but I thought Barão won that opening round fairly definitively. And then he just gassed out. The not cutting to 135 pounds didn't make a difference for him. Sterling's grappling just looked better. He looked like the stronger fighter. And his striking, he sat down on his punches a little more, which made him more effective. That was fantastic. And it's a good win for Sterling. He'll build on that going forward. Barão, I'm not sure what to do. He's not a 135-pound fighter anymore. He's too small for 145. He is stuck in the middle, which is unfortunate. Featherweight bout. Got this one right. Had Ricardo Lamas. Slight dog. A lot of people on Jason Knight here coming in on short notice. I thought Lamas could stop him, but more likely was going to go to decision and simply just be the more active fighter, wear him down, get some top position, hold that top position, and really prevent Jason Knight from getting that offense going, whether he was working from his guard with the rubber guard and using mission control to shut down and maybe even attack his opponent from top position, and just using that aggressive, hands up, forward, coming forward, talking trash and intimidating and just outworking, overwhelming fighters. I just thought Lamas was going to buy into any of that shit, but it said Ricardo Lamas wouldn't stop the show in the first round, and that was impressive. Ricardo Lamas, and people talked about this. They said there's a lot of young up-and-coming fighters, whether it be Yair Rodriguez losing to Frankie Edgar, there's a couple other ones, Nuho Choi against Cub Swanson. These young, hungry, up-and-coming featherweights are getting so close, and then they run into one of these established, former title contender, these veteran fighters who are right there on the cusp of being a champion, just not quite good enough, potentially hardened by Jose Aldo and his ability to beat them back, and then boom, they shut down these young challengers from taking a step further. And Jason Knight, Rodriguez, Choi, they'll all be back. These are the type of guys that will all rebound, will be back in contention over the next couple of years. But until the Lamases and Edgars of the world get pushed out of their Cub Swanson, these guys, it's going to be a tough top 5 to crack, and Jason Knight found that out the hard way. So prelims, I am a deplorable 2-5, and at this point I've thrown my fucking hat and said I've had enough. And again, I apologize to the people I was watching the event with because, it was a shit show. I really put a lot of work into this one and thought I'd done well, and it just wasn't the case. So, sorry. Not sorry. Main card, Volkan Ozdemir. Where'd this guy fucking come from? 42 seconds. He takes out Jimmy Manuwa. Wow. People are clamoring to see Ozdemir versus John Jones for the title. No, they're not. But this is the state of the UFC's light heavyweight division. Jimmy Manuwa was marketable. He wins this fight. Take John Jones to the United Kingdom, to the UK, to Great Britain, to England, to London, and put a title fight on there. People will buy that shit up, even though Jimmy Manuwa probably shouldn't be in the top 5 in the division. Now we have Switzerland's own Volkan Ozdemir is on the cusp of a title shot. What the fuck do we do with this guy? Do we actually do... Maybe we do a fight night. Maybe that's what we should do. Maybe we do a UFC Fight Night 125, Jones versus Ozdemir. Get Jones exposed to some casual fans who only tune into TSN or whatever event is shown on TV, not a pay-per-view. But it's a hard sell. One of my suggestions was to have... Anthony Rumble Johnson has openly stated, I want a shot at the champ. I want a shot at Jones. If they want it... Bring him back, let him fight Ozdemir, let him fucking see how that goes. If he takes him out, then give him the shot at Jones. If Ozdemir takes out Anthony Rumble Johnson, he gets a shot at the title. I don't give a shit what his name is. He gets a shot at the title. That's just the way it is. But again, this is no Ryan Bader, no Rumble, no Phil Davis. These guys that have either retired or gone to Bellator is the reason we're in the current state we are in the division. So that's why Jones is calling for guys outside of the division. Up next, Robbie Lawler, Donald Cerrone. This is a good fight, very good fight. I lost it, as expected, kind of the theme of the night. It's my last loss of the night. Robbie Lawler, unfortunately, simply dug down deep like he traditionally does. 29-28 across the board. He wins the third round by being the more active fighter. He came out like he was shot out of a gun to start the fight. And Cerrone, kudos to Donald Cerrone for dealing with that type of pressure and that type of onslaught, surviving and getting back to where he needed to be. Back in that fight, back in contention. So he ends up taking the second round. It's 1-1 going to the third frame. Robbie Lawler again comes out strong, pushes him, is more active, wins a very close fight. I had no problem with the decision, even though I wanted Cerrone to win. I was happy to see Lawler avoids that post-title fight letdown. It's a good thing. Very good thing. I'm curious to see what they do in the future. Will they give him a shot at the title? They are currently talking Masvidal versus Lawler for the interim belt. That's a whole fucked up scenario there, right there. So I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of interim fights unless it makes a fight it's not a main event that should go 5 rounds. Go 5 rounds. We had that recently. What was that fight? I can't remember. You can put in the comments if you remember. But yeah. Now we get to the 3 title fights. I got all 3 of them right, but it's not like I'm excited at this point. I'm 2-8. And but yeah, here comes Cyborg to stop that onslaught, except for she kind of didn't. I thought she'd take out Avenger in the first. I knew Avenger was tough. Holy hell, girl. She took an absolute beating to the 2-minute mark of round number 3 before she went down with some violent knee strikes. But Cyborg put it on. A lot of people said, oh, this is not a good performance by Cyborg. You know what? It is a good performance. She's not a gas bag. She might have been slowing down a bit, but she beat the shit out of Avenger for 3 rounds. And showed she can put it on you. You might be tough, but if your game plan is to go in there and get your head stoved in for a couple of rounds and then hope that Cyborg comes out, can't even get off the stool Homer Simpson style, and then you push her over and you're the champ, that ain't fucking happening. She beat the shit out of Avenger for 3 rounds. It was very impressive. I was very impressed with her performance. She wasn't just a berserker who went out there and threw hands and hoped to overwhelm her. She systematically beat her down and made it very evident that Avenger, not only was she physically not in her class, but technically speaking, from a skill standpoint, not on her level. Now, Avenger, credit to her for being so tough. She'll go back to bantamweight. She'll make some noise if she's not forever destroyed by that performance. But, yeah, so going forward, who's Cyborg fight next? They're talking Holly Holm. I'd watch that fight. Amanda Nunes would be an interesting fight against Cyborg as well. I don't think she'll take it. Obviously, Jermaine D. Rondami is not interested in that matchup either. Is it Jordina Bars? Is that the girl? It's the kickboxer, I believe, that defeated Cyborg. I'd say bring her in and let her fight, but again, all it takes is Cyborg to get on top of her and the fight's over anyway. But hey, I'm sure they'll make some interesting matchups. Kat Zingano's kind of been angling as well for that fight, and I'd watch that matchup. The women's fight, it's very interesting right now with these divisions, with 125 and 145 pounds now popping up. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the future. Don't bring Ronda back. Co-main event, welterweight title fight. Tyrone Woodley takes out Damian Maia. And again, same thing. I talked to people I'm with. I said, this is going to be a quick fight where one of these guys gets an early finish, either Woodley by knockout or Maia by submission, or it's going to be a boring as balls matchup. And you have to appreciate the dogged determinateness of Damian Maia in pursuit of the takedown. And I thought there was a possibility that if he pushed really hard for the first couple of rounds, Woodley would wear down and eventually Maia would get into the mat and potentially be able to lock up a submission. It didn't happen. Woodley did a nice job of staying composed, fighting a very smart fight, avoiding any scenarios that saw him get put on the ground where he's in serious trouble. As a wrestler, he just doesn't spend a lot of time on his back. But it wasn't an exciting fight. That's 3 in a row. It's kind of been a little bit lackluster from the champ. He's taken some heat. He hasn't overly responded well to it. It sounds like the George St. Pierre-Michael Bisping fight is back on. They've taken away GSP versus Woodley. I don't know who Woodley fights next. Obviously, he's dealing with some injuries or whatever. They're talking about the interim title fight with Lawler versus Masvidal. Either way, I'm curious to see what happens with Woodley and how he, this crap, he's going to leak stuff against Dana if he doesn't get a public apology. I think that's been squashed at this point. But, not a great fight, but still a title defense for Woodley nonetheless. And finally, main event time, Jon Jones, Daniel Cormier. I found it very interesting. The first thing I want to talk about is pre-fight, you saw Michael Bisping and these guys give their predictions, and they all picked Cormier. And then Bisping in a post-fight podcast somewhere openly admitted that the only reason he picked Cormier is A, because he works with him, and B, he knows that the Fox stream is going into the dressing room, and him picking against a colleague would have just left a bad taste in Cormier's mouth heading into the match, and he said he didn't want to do that. So, understandably, he picks Cormier. Cormier looked better, but I felt the announcers were way too high on him. They were really clinging to his balls in that fight. His close-range striking was landing. He cracked Jones a couple of times. He was pressing forward. I thought Jones was the busier fighter, and I think that pays off more, especially, Cormier wasn't landing enough big shots to say, hey, he's overwhelming. He's hurting him. I thought Jones just picking away at him, doing his job, and then knocking him was very impressive. I picked Jones by stoppage. I felt that the fight was probably going to end with some form of knockdown, followed by Jones just landing a ridiculous amount of undefended ground and pound from top position. And that's what happened. I'm very rarely right like that, but I'll take credit for that one. Jon Jones picks up the title. Very gracious in victory. Daniel Cormier, again, we saw the Joe Rogan interview. Daniel Cormier did not handle it well, and you can't blame the guy. I talked about in my last video that he had emotionally invested himself in being the champion for a prolonged period of time. All that, it almost seems like a lie to him now at this point, I would think, because people say, you're not the champ till you beat Jon Jones. Oh, yeah, I am the champ. He beat himself. Well, no, he just came back, kicked your ass even worse than the first time. He's the champ. Unfortunately, you were a placeholder. What's he do going forward? He's 38. Heavyweight division. I would love to see him go back to heavyweight and see what he can do. I know Cain Velasquez, his training partner and friend, is there, but if Cain can't get the title away from Stipe, let Cormier go in there. Let him win a fight or two and challenge Miocic for the title. I think it'd be exciting. For Jon Jones, he's calling out Brock Lesnar. Why not? Big money to be made. I anticipate we'll see Jones versus Gus next, and then he'll probably call out Lesnar again, and we'll see if they can get that fight together. Do we see Stipe versus Bones for the a big light heavyweight versus heavyweight title fight? Or championship bout? Maybe it's not even a championship bout. Maybe it's the main event, 5-round special attraction. I don't care. I'll watch. Fuck yeah, I'll watch that. That'll be great. A very interesting fight. So those are my predictions. Those were my predictions. Not very good ones. And again, 5-8. It was my only letdown. Because if you look back, you quickly take a quick sneakeroo at my records. I've been actually kicking ass since middle of June. 9-3, 8-5. 8-3, 8-3, 9-3, 8-5. 5-8, the stinky one, and then 9-2. So it's not amazing. It's tolerable. I did have a pretty rough stretch prior to that with a 10-3 mixed in the middle. But either way, I like to post my records online. My bet packs, hey, some win, some lose. It is what it is. It's betting. But I've been rambling a lot, and it's a long video, but I appreciate taking the time to tune in and commenting and doing everything you do. And I kind of enjoy getting back in front of the camera here. We'll see if we do that in the future and see what I can come up with. I do intend to do a video of some kind for the McGregor-Mayweather fight and just give you my 2 cents on everything involved there. Talk about everything that's going on. So I'll hopefully post that the next week or two. We'll see how things go. All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you back here when we see you. Take care.